Welcome our dear viewers. This is Senior 5 Biology and our topic of study is Transport by Teacher Rhoda Muganda. And I'm sure that all of us have heard about transport. Now specifically, the transport we are looking at is basically in living organisms. I may not take you through what living organisms are. However, we have to have this in mind, that every living organism needs a media of transport in order to obtain the materials that they require. So in this particular case, we are going to look at transport in plants. However, as an introduction to transport, basing on the knowledge that we had about cell biology, we want to look at how do living organisms obtain their food, obtain the different materials that they require, obtain the different things, let's put it in that way, that they need in order to survive. So in this case, let's look at a few objectives that we will be basing on in order to have this lesson complete. The first objective that we need to look at today is to be able to define the word transport. Our second objective for today's lesson is to state the forms of transport in the different living organisms. Another objective that we have for today is to state the importance of transport systems in every living organism. Besides that, our next objective should be to state the different transport systems in basically plants. Of course, we will look at animals later on, but today we are looking at the transport systems in plants. And lastly, our last objective, but not least, is to state the adaptations of each transport system in plants. Okay, members, to begin with, we want to look at how we can define the word transport. I am sure in geography, they must have talked about transport. But today, we want to look at transport in terms of biology. Now, when we talk of transport, we look at transport as a means by which materials are moved. Okay? With these materials can be in form of substances, but we look at the means by which materials are moved in and around the different living organisms. When we talk of an organism, one thing that comes to your mind is that an organism is made up of cells. So meaning that when we talk of transport, we are looking at transport inside and out of a cell. Besides that, there are different substances that an animal or an organism needs actually to transport. And these substances include carbon dioxide. Besides that, another substance that needs to be transported includes oxygen and many others that you should be having in mind. I am sure you're already thinking of, okay, what do organisms need in order to survive? Those are the materials that need to be transported within a living organism. Okay, so in that case, we want to look at the different transport forms in the living organisms. So if an animal or a plant requires something, how does it then obtain that particular substance? So we want to look at the different transport forms in living organisms. Our dear learners, wherever you are, I am sure you're now already thinking, okay, if an organism is made up of cells, then how does it obtain the materials that we have listed? For example, the oxygen, the carbon dioxide, the different foods that are required, the ions, the mineral salts. How does it obtain? So in that case, we want to look at the different transport systems that organisms use. One of them we can see is simple diffusion. I am sure already you have looked at simple diffusion. Here basically we are looking at an organism obtaining food basing on difference in concentration gradient, simply from outside and into the cell, basing on a difference in concentration gradient. The other method or the other system that organisms use is basically what we call facilitated diffusion. Of course, these ones already we have looked at earlier on, so I'm just going to state them out. So we have simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and then we have osmosis. Besides that, we have what we call active transport. I am sure we already have a clue about active transport. This one requires energy, okay? And then we have what we call endocytosis. We have what we call phagocytosis, of course, basing on the different organisms. Not every organism will use this system, but there are some that will use these systems, others may use other systems. Then we have what we call pinocytosis, we have receptor-mediated endocytosis, and then finally we have what we call exocytosis. All these are different ways by which organisms actually transport the materials that they require. Now, besides that, how important is transport to living organisms? Of course, there is no way you can have a particular process in the body without its importance. Now, we want to see how important is transport to living organisms. Is it necessary anyway? Think about it. So, one thing that we need to see here is that transport is necessary for the supply, okay, of cells with the oxygen. As we had seen earlier on, that oxygen is one of the substances or one of the materials that plants and animals or living organisms actually require for survival. Now, when we look at an organism requiring oxygen, obviously, what comes to your mind is that the cells need this oxygen, and what do they need it for? Respiration. We know there is need for breakdown of food in order to release energy. The other importance of transport that we need to look at is for the regulation of pH, okay? In that case, we are looking at regulating the internal environment. We know that the internal environment basically depends on the enzymes. So if the enzymes are supposed to work normally, we remember this in mind, or we bear this in mind, that every enzyme works basing on the specific pH, okay? So in that case, transport is required in order to regulate the internal environment. Okay, then the other point that we see, or the other importance that we see, is in order to excrete toxic waste substances. Every living organism produces toxic substances, produces things that are not required in the body. So in that case, every organism actually requires to excrete, to remove these waste products of metabolism, and that's what we call excretion. So we excrete, we remove these waste products by a process called excretion, and all these waste products must be transported to wherever they are required to be passed out. For example, look at urine, okay? Urine contains very many toxic substances, but how is it removed? It is removed with water. In actual sense, it's removed with water. For example, when you sweat, waste products are taken out. In urine, when you urinate, waste products are also taken out. All those are excretory products. The other importance of transport system is basically in secretion of useful substances. You'll find that, for example, enzymes are produced by certain organs. However, those organs cannot carry them to where they are required. So in that case, what happens? the body needs actually a system that enables those secretions to reach where they are required. So in that case, transport is very important in order to make sure those different substances reach where they are required. Thank you very much. We expect to meet you next time in our next lesson.